So this is evidence-based approaches to prevention of targeted violence. We are going to look at some definitions and a very, I would say, robust and generalizable model of targeted violence that was originally based on workplace violence and school shootings, prevention of mass attacks in educational settings, but it generalizes to all kinds of settings, I would say, including healthcare. We're going to talk about the emerging field of threat assessment and management, which takes a unique approach to risk and threat management that diverges from the earlier emphasis you would hear, a couple decades ago about, or all these years about the challenges in predicting violent behavior, right? And originally the focus was on people in psychiatric or correctional settings, trying to determine placements or whether or when it might be safe to let them out. And it was never easy trying to predict whether or when someone might become violent or aggressive in a general sense. And so this structured professional judgment approach is it's a way of systematizing clinical and other data and ensuring that kind of not minimal standards, but making sure that that all the right categories or dimensions are considered when looking at potential risk or threat. And we'll talk more about that. I'm going to show you some information about one of these measures in particular that is focused on lone actor terrorists or attackers. And then we're going to talk some about more about targeted violence prevention best practices. So this is a headline from Mother Jones, which has done a lot of great journalism and research on gun violence in general. And so new FBI study shows mass shooters aren't loners who suddenly just snap. And it says rampant killers plan and give off warning signs and mostly get their guns legally. This is no longer a new study, but it's an important study. They're talking about phase 2 of a 2014 FBI study looking at 160 cases of mass shootings, active shooters between 2000 and 2013 in the US. And in phase 2, they were focused on pre-attack behaviors. And, the punchline is that usually there were a lot of, or not a lot, but at least some observable or knowable signs and indicators that someone might be planning an attack or that they might be at least higher risk of this type of behavior. So that study is cited in the reference section at the back of the slides. It's Silver, Simons, and Cron. But let me advance my slide. Okay. Oh, so what else do I want to say about this? I have notes to help me keep my head together. So mass attacks with no apparent criminal or terroristic nexus have become an increasing concern in the US over the past 2 decades plus, starting with the 1999 Columbine high school killing of 13 students and staff by 2 male students who then took their own lives. And so through exhaustive post-attack analysis, researchers are gaining clarity about the motives, characteristics, and methods of these dangerous individuals. So targeted violence, refers to incidents involving an identifiable subject who possesses the intent and potential to cause harm to an identifiable target. And the targets could be other individuals, members of a hated demographic, by race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc., a specific organization, work or school, religious institution, healthcare setting, where the person works or their target works, or they might just have a general grievance. And heck, this is where sometimes you see delusional people, show up outside the gates of the CIA, because that's become part of their delusional system. Although it is not usually serious mental illness involved with mass attacks. And I did cite another study, actually, yeah, so this guy wrote a book too, Stone, at the end about mental illness and mass killers, and it's about 20% who are actually psychotic and not in control of their faculties, and might have a chance at an insanity defense. The rest tend to be can be radicalized, conspiracy minded, maybe like kind of semi-delusional, but essentially functional. They could pass a mental status exam, or more often, bad personality disorders, extreme narcissism, antisocial personality, where essentially the person has no conscience, maybe paranoid personality, where they do perceive everyone, they're very antagonistic and adversarial. They're hypersensitive about perceiving that they're being disrespected or demeaned, and therefore they might, and they tend to nurse grievances, which can then lead to violent ideation. But anyway, so targets, symbolic locations such as religious houses or populated public spaces, usually motivated by personal grievance, hate-based ideology, extremism, or possibly psychotic or delusional thinking. And are there any questions or comments about targeted violence? And in particular, how does this compare and contrast with other kinds of violence and aggression, like affective, reactive violence, where the person is actually feeling threatened and it's more of a defensive thing, or impulsive or opportunistic violence or aggression? What do people think about that? Or any examples of things that you've seen along the way, cases you've dealt with?
Well, the one, targeted violence that is, motivated by religious or political extremism. I think in the US we have plenty of examples of that, with the varying, either be political or like hate-based ideology. I think of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
The example of an individual with a view towards a demographic of people. For those who don't know, it was somebody who basically went into a synagogue on a Saturday, which is when Jews gather to pray, and opened fired and killed a number of older adults. So that's kind of what I think when I think of, like, hate-based.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big issue these days. And we're going to talk some more about lone attackers, or another term is self-radicalized individuals. I guess meaning that they might not have a formal affiliation with any group, but they are following these issues, usually online, and very identified with the cause, or possibly with perceived victims, whomever they think might be being oppressed. And maybe the people, with some of the international terrorism in particular, maybe there are genuinely, real problems with US policy, and there's more than one victim. But of course, you're not supposed to try to address those issues by shooting a place up. And of course, a lot of extremist groups and causes are now, they've realized that we don't have to plan and implement all the attacks ourselves. We can just do this messaging and try to encourage or inspire or provoke others, including sometimes just disturbed individuals who they might have no, like I said, the personality issues, extreme immaturity, might be very easily influenced, could be low intelligence, could be mentally ill, could be autistic. And, they get it in their mind that I'm going to go ahead and, make a statement. And it's not pretty, obviously. But, the other thing I want to say about targeted violence is it might, it's going to the study. The idea that these are loners who suddenly snap, that's the appearance, right? If you don't see the signs. And sometimes you don't see the signs because they're very good operators, and that's the most psychopathic ones, like the guy who shot up the music festival in Las Vegas out of the hotel window. I mean, he had a lot of firearms, but that was perfectly legal. He was a maybe kind of professional gambler. He might have been, pretty corrupt. He probably wasn't a nice guy, but he appears to have deliberately and successfully managed to avoid betraying any indications that he might be planning some a mass attack. And FBI and other investigators combed through and tried to find a motive, figure out why the hell he did this, and it appears that he just wanted to kill as many people as he could. So it's just a psychopathic thing that and FBI behavioral analysis unit says that sometimes the motive is to just kill and be killed, and most of them, these attackers, die by their own hand or they're shot by law enforcement. But anyway, this is a like, as I said, very robust model of targeted or intended violence, and it usually starts with a grievance. And this is a very important concept that cuts across motives and characteristics and circumstances of most of these attacks. Even one population, one type of attacker I haven't mentioned who actually looms very large is the coercive control domestic abuser. And it's not, I mean, a lot of them are dangerous sociopaths and, inflicting serious injury on intimate partners, former intimate partners, stalking them, basically trying to make their lives hell, particularly, and it's usually a man. And if the woman leaves, he's just going to, torment her indefinitely, and maybe, sometimes threaten to kill her or actually kill her or kill her children so that the rest of her life will be ruined, or kill other people in her circle, or, so we have, this is a motive for maybe one study, one sample, it was, I don't know, maybe like 16%. It was a pretty substantial percentage of cases were motivated by domestic abuse, domestic violence, and these perpetrators take out a bunch of others besides the original target, and including responding law enforcement. They're very dangerous to police too, because they have a lot of this last resort thinking. They might be perceived as suicidal, but it's more that there's the destructive rage that the woman has escaped their subjugation. It's like it's worth it to them, to die or to lose their freedom in order to kill her and maybe, stage a violent showdown. But of course, most domestic violence perpetrators do not launch mass attacks, but a high percentages, and I'm sorry, I don't have the stats in front of me, so I'm not going to hazard a guess, but pretty good percentages of mass attackers have histories of domestic abuse. But anyway, starting with a grievance, which might lead to, in any kind of attack or some kind of violent ideation, which the person may or may not betray to others. If we're fortunate, they post it on Facebook, or they tell people who might make a report, but they might or might not. And of course, where things start getting really dangerous is if the person starts researching or planning some kind of attack. Operational, and you see that, yes, and
So
you
it,
see that but the way so how do we know that we need to look at someone in this context? How do we know that someone might present a possible threat and increased risk of violence or aggression? It's what you said. Do they seem to be somehow aggrieved? Are they calling attention to themselves with, erratic or hostile or menacing behavior?
check,
Okay.
check, check. So in law enforcement terms, we're speaking of intent. In
Yes.
medical or in behavioral health, we're talking about neurocognitive domains such as executive function. So this is an important point, especially reflecting on the past slides that you share. So the myth of people being the myth of not being able to see the lone wolf is indeed a myth. And the way to prevent that is to develop our reach back capabilities and capacities with our behavioral health professionals. Because you've also touched on the DSM-4, right? When you spoke of the axis 1,
Yes.
and when you spoke of the axis 2, and this type of narcissistic rage.
Yes.
So appreciate that. And this is a beautiful slide right here, because we have the anger, we have the violence, we have the recon,
Yes.
we have executive function doing
Yes.
recon, and
Exactly.
we have, whether it be a knife as a weapon, such as in Idaho, or the abundance of long arms that we have in the US, or even 1994, 1995 Japan with sarin.
Yes.
Because these people, although they were a chemical terrorist organization, they were intellectual and violent people. And as Ilana mentioned, it's a bit difficult to differentiate where the terrorism begins and the lone wolf violence begins or ends. So thank you.
That's absolutely right. And often it's a mixture of personal grievance and, whatever, ideology or, socio-political or religious concerns can be conflicting identifications. And folks might have seen some of the press coverage of the people who attacked the Capitol. Some of them were like left-wing activists, several years ago, and now they're right-wing activists, and then they became domestic terrorists, essentially. I mean, some people are just unstable, right? And again, easily influenced or they're paranoid, or they have maybe like schizotypal or other like related to neurocognitive impairment, just highly idiosyncratic perceptions and and behaviors that you can't even begin to figure out. But the health professional might see that the person is seems delusional in some regard, or irrational, impulsive, reckless, and most of all aggressive. And we'll talk some more about violence indicators. I mean, a lot of these perpetrators show some kind of aggression, or people are afraid of them, or on eggshells, and you hear sometimes the neighbors are later interviewed, and they're always kind of like, oh, I always thought that guy would commit a mass shooting. But this model is very elegant because it's as you said, operational. It applies whether or not someone is in their right mind or in control of their faculties. I mean, if someone is mentally ill or otherwise impaired, and they're just like really, really impaired and really low functioning, they very often can't succeed in planning an attack and carrying it off without being like pretty easily detected, like the shoe bomber, or you see, some sort of ham-handed efforts that you could tell that guy just looked mentally ill. Now the guy who looked like the Joker, who went in the Batman movie and shot up the theater in Colorado, he looked mad as a hatter. But unfortunately, there's just little to prevent someone like that from taking a semi-automatic weapon into a movie theater, before anyone can intervene. There it goes. There we are, that he's slaughtered a bunch of people. Okay, so in the interest of time, I will just buzz through a little bit about threat assessment and management. As I said, an emerging field that emphasizes real-time assessment and management of potentially dangerous individuals. And this is a major departure from the earlier law enforcement and security posture of only responding once an attack had been made. And an example of this is like Violence Against Women Act in 1994 finally began to recognize and acknowledge and build in mechanisms for the fact that if you're being stalked and harassed, you are in danger, and it does warrant, like, that stuff should be against the law, and law enforcement shouldn't have to wait until the perpetrator kills you to do something, right? And so in the same vein, similar vein, this TAM approach, which is primarily spearheaded by retired or not always retired, but law enforcement, mental health professionals, school administrators, the security field is very involved. This is a set of investigative and operational techniques used to identify, assess, and manage risk of targeted violence. And so you're gathering relevant behavioral and contextual data, and I will say it's usually dynamic versus static variables that we're most interested in. So if somebody did something aggressive as a teenager, like, that might be of interest, it is maybe a risk factor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do something aggressive as an adult, and it wouldn't be in itself a reason to do a targeted violence assessment on that person, right? But what we're more concerned about is if they seem hostile and aggressive in real time, or if you learn that they come to work looking like $1 million and seem perfectly appropriate, but then you learn that they've been arrested for trying to strangle their wife or girlfriend. Well, that's a dangerous sociopath who could very well, if things don't go his way, he could turn around and do something aggressive toward others. And this is a structured, systematic approach to prevention, which doesn't necessarily rely on prediction. And the main primary methodology in threat assessment and management is called structured professional judgment. And this is a guided clinical approach detailing the minimum set of risk factors that should be considered in every case of concern. It does not have to be implemented by mental health professionals, although they should be involved in gathering and analyzing data and making recommendations. But this is to bring greater consistency and visibility to any threat or risk assessment process. And these look like checklists, behavioral checklists, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute with some of the factors, some of the variables that could denote increased violence risk, but they're not scored. And it's kind of a structured qualitative analysis where someone who might show only one or two indicators could be of more concern than someone who shows a bunch of them, depending on what the indicators are, depending on the context in which you're doing the assessment. But the other thing I'll say is that this is in contrast to traditional violence risk assessment, which I mentioned at the beginning, which was more actuarial and, calculating the likelihood of violent acts based on someone's similarity to recidivist versus non-recidivist. Unfortunately, that was often based a lot on demographics. And so you could have people, more likely to get a, tougher prison sentence, or less likely to go on parole, because of their gender, race, other static variables that really say little or nothing about whether the individual is a violence risk. And so static versus dynamic variables. And the older approach was more formulaic. It was basically statistical calculations of risk, although they were often also complemented by clinical interviews. But that was idiosyncratic too. That would be just, if you're lucky, an individual mental health professional giving their opinion. But that's, there's nothing necessarily too reliable or systematic about that approach. Any questions or thoughts about this? Go ahead. And this is just a list of some of the instruments highlighting some of the settings and populations where structured professional judgments can be effective, can be really useful and effective. And you see that it ranges from forensic, correctional, psychiatric, workplace, SARAS, the spousal assault ones. There's more than one of those, in particular looking at homicide risk, which of these perpetrators, excuse me, is, might be more or less dangerous and likely to kill the woman or others. There's structured professional judgment for youth, for young people, psychopathy checklist, violent extremism. And what we're going to look at is the TRAP 18 terrorist radicalization assessment protocol, which actually applies to lone attackers regardless of their motivation. So
how do these overlap with military and government security clearance?
How do they? Well, what do you think about that?
What do I think about it?
Yes.
I'm asking the question for the young students. I think here we're touching upon a lot of threats. I know when they enter the military or government, they will apply for their security clearance, begin with basic, secret, and then move on to TSSCI. all these are warnings. The people with past history of even I don't know the PCLR psychopathology, but the Axis 2 personality disorders, we know that they're administratively discharged from the Department of Defense. We often see domestic violence, and when they come in to the military, they're discharged. They're discharged. And so we have a lot of overlap here with the risk assessment tools, and all of these, in my opinion, do overlap with the security, your security clearance.
Yes.
They all point to danger, threat in, and why we discharge the Axis 2 cluster Bs or cluster A and C, and say they do not meet behavioral health fitness standards in the militaries, because they're often divisive, they're often manipulative, they're not good for unit integrity, and they're a bit toxic to the culture that we try to, the culture and the health of our people. And this is, I think, what you're pointing out now, looking at different populations, easier to deal in the DoD, much easier than my experience as a civilian emergency medicine physician. In the DoD, if I had domestic violence or rape, I had all the tools and the people. In the civilian world, we just don't have this. And the government, or in law enforcement, comes in between. We sometimes, well, in federal law enforcement, we have a little more medical and behavioral health support to the operators. Local law enforcement, not so much. But these are the kind of points that I'm bringing out. Now, other people on the Zoom can comment about their experience as international organizations, deployments as non-governmental organizations, but these threats exist whenever we have populations who have a mission. So that's my point on this, and I appreciate all these slides. I think they're really stimulating.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. And we had some discussion about my time. I was doing indirect behavioral risk assessments for DoD after I retired from the FBI. And this was, sometimes mental health involved, or somebody was becoming psychotic and delusional because of an untreated thyroid problem, that kind of thing. But high percentage were folks who, just as you're saying, glaring character pathology that somehow, got through whatever psychological screening, whatever background investigation and clearance adjudication processes. And, a good sociopath knows how to present as, much more reasonable and appropriate than they actually are. And so it would show up mainly in the form of domestic abuse and sexual assault, and sometimes other aggression. I'm thinking about the former FBI agent whose name is escaping me. He had been like an operator in the Air Force, maybe special operations, and he came to the FBI for a couple years and then was not getting the high profile assignments. He wasn't going to make SWAT or hostage rescue team, and he kind of stomped off and went back to the Air Force. But he was failing out of a pararescue program, and unfortunately they humiliated him in the process, and he turned around. He was trying to launch a mass attack. He ended up killing only his commanding officer and himself. But you know, in the FBI, he was making other agents uncomfortable with all his aggression and kind of unhinged stuff, like telling people to choke him when they were working on, you know, tactical defensive uh, skills. He was always, he had this like real, like sharp, dangerous plastic knife that he always wore around his neck. And one time he kind of like pulled it on somebody who was joshing him about something. And all these things, you know, the FBI under responded and just kind of, you know, I guess, I don't know, thought that they could manage him. And he went on to the Air Force and, you know, killed somebody. So there are often signs, but the organization, the systems that are supposed to be, you know, detecting and responding to these things might or might not be up for the job. And we'll talk in some more detail here about
Another
this.
another example is Oklahoma City, right? So
Yes.
he flunked out of SF training, Army, and multiple examples. And then
Yes.
thank you for pointing out suicidal risk, suicide by cop, homicide, suicide, as well as suicide in previous slides.
Absolutely. So this TRAP 18 is a reliable and valid structured professional judgment for lone attackers versus group-based attacks. And it's based on 8 proximal warning behaviors, identifying patterns of proximal risk for targeted violence, and 10 distal characteristics derived from forensic expertise and the empirical research. And so, without further ado, the warning behaviors. And there's an excellent article. Reed Molloy is the psychologist and researcher who devised this instrument and the waiver 21, and he's just a you know, great thinker as well as researcher. There is an article that I highly recommend in the, it's not here. his warning behaviors. There's a more general article that I will share with your leadership so that they can make it available. But proximal warning behaviors, obviously pathway behavior, any indication, any suspicion of research or planning or preparation for an attack, fixation, pathological preoccupation with a person or cause. And often that's the focus of someone's grievance. Whether it is ideological or radicalized issue of radicalization, an issue of domestic abuse, or just some personal or workplace grievance, fixation, which, and again, that can cut across whether or not the person is psychiatrically impaired. They could still be fixated. And that's where a lot of stalking and harassing and other menacing behavior comes in. Identification, which we were just discussing, that pseudo commando presentation, or appearing to identify or admire previous attackers, or feel like you are the, maybe in a very grandiose way, that you're going to make a big statement about a particular cause and make everybody take notice with your violent showdown. Novel aggression is often in the process of leading up to a targeted attack. Somebody might be doing other aggressive things, and often that's just because they are aggressive and anyway, and that's just dispositionally, they're reckless, they're aggressive. Maybe they are sadistic. Some of these perpetrators have been, torturing animals and all of that. So it might or might not be directly related to a planned attack, but it's something you should take note of. So in healthcare settings, gosh, if if you see someone who is full of rage and animosity, and they are also acting aggressive or threatening to the healthcare personnel, even if you're not the focus of their anger, but they're just still you can tell that they're that it's risky that way, to have them in your setting. That might be an example too of someone who might then go out and do something on a larger scale. Energy bursts. This is again in a vein of attack planning and preparation. The person could be, staying up all hours, or taking trips to secure equipment, or maybe trying to engage with others online, with the research, or try to get operational or tactical ideas from other radicalized individuals, that kind of thing. Leakage is this is a gift if the offender communicates to a third party that they intend to do, or they state or they imply that they're going to make some kind of attack. That's a gift, and you hope that the third party or that somebody will report it to the authorities. Last resort thinking. So this is where the person perceives that there is no good alternative, or at least nothing that would be as gratifying as an act of violence, and you're taking out a lot of people along with themselves. So it's kind of a pressured and like, I don't know, kind of like they have themselves in a corner, and that is a bad sign. And then a directly communicated threat is what it sounds like. And if you're fortunate, the person might be, I don't know, unhinged enough, or just, have impaired enough that they will go ahead and make threats. And there's a whole area of study trying to discern people who threaten versus people who actually attack. And there's a book called Howlers and it's not coming to me, but there are distinctions between people who threaten and people who attack, but obviously there's substantial overlap, and all threats should be taken seriously and investigated, needless to say. So the distal characteristics, these are not warning signs, but they are background characteristics, things that distinguish, based on reverse engineering or post-attack analysis. These are some things that distinguish attackers from non-attackers, that they might have either, in real time, in the present, this presentation of grievance and moral outrage, apparent ideological motivations, failure to affiliate, and failure of sexual pair bonding refer to the fact, and thwarting of occupational goals. A lot of these guys look like losers, right? And they have not managed to successfully attain, adult relationships, a viable career path. Some of them, the extremist groups are even rejecting, because they're too weird or they're too low functioning. And yet they can be online, and they can be identifying and at least, having sort of a fantasy affiliation and sense of belonging with these extremist groups or other individuals that they don't even know. Obviously, mental illness, certain kinds, especially involving paranoia, that's a risk factor. It's not an indicator. A lot of them are creative and innovative too, and obviously any history of criminal violence, usually tells you there's a sociopathy involved, which would correlate highly with other violence and aggression. So, any questions or comments about any of this? Oh, and I'm conscious of the time. I should keep moving, right? I've got just a few more. This is a 2020 study where they're validating the TRAP 18 on a variety of dimensions. So this is pretty interesting. They have nine samples of lone attackers, and you can see it's a variety of types of attacks, international sample, and these are the percentages of attackers who showed fixation warning behavior. And not surprisingly, it's very high with like public figures and intimate partner homicide. Some of them are more general, lone actor terrorists. That could be all kinds of motivations. But you see the school threateners, so people who merely made threats, only 16%. So as opposed to attackers. So this is an interesting way of trying to validate an instrument like the TRAP 18. A little bit about awareness and reporting. These are some violence indicators that I have devised over a period of time, and advised various private and government and military entities, to be educating their populations about some of what to look for in terms of potential for not only targeted violence, but also affective violence or aggression, impulsive or opportunistic violence. And of course, the point is that you want people to feel comfortable reporting these kind of concerns. So here I'm just speaking to primary and secondary prevention. Primary prevention, so just creating the conditions to, first of all, minimize the likelihood that try not to antagonize people. Don't give them a reason to attack your organization, right? And also to create an environment where people, bystanders or observers, feel safe and confident that if they make a report that their confidentiality will be protected, that it'll be taken seriously, and that maybe something will be done. Offering supportive and preventative services, obviously, to help ensure that people who are genuinely struggling don't go in one of these directions where they could become either suicidal or a threat to others. Emphasizing in terms of your security culture, collective responsibility to maintain safety. And then the secondary prevention. So this refers to when a concern arises, or when you see that there might be increased risk with a person or situation, you want to make sure that there are secure mechanisms of reporting, that you have an interdisciplinary threat assessment team or the equivalent in place, obviously taking all threats and concerns seriously. And some of the things that you can do with a person of concern, enhanced monitoring, closer supervision, user activity monitoring on the computer, various security measures, physical security and otherwise, progressive discipline. You don't let antisocial or aggressive or destructive people, including bullies and people with showing lower level aggression, you don't let them get away with it. So you use whatever mechanisms are in place to constrain the bad behavior and to protect others who might be adversely affected. Psychiatric detention that's kind of extreme cases, but it is a tool. Protection orders, and we heard about red flag laws. Some states you can petition a court, I guess, so that someone will have to surrender their firearms, or they could be confiscated if the person is presenting certain type of threat. So just a nice quote from Edward Kennedy: violence is an admission that one's ideas and goals cannot prevail on their own merits. And we have references, although, I already thought of another one that I should have included, but this is some general and specific stuff pertaining to the presentation that I hope will be helpful. I know we are out of time.
It's just, I feel like in this country and globally, we are at a point where we think a lot about we're reactive, right? We're reacting to climate change and the natural disasters that are a result of that. And we are reacting to violence and man-made disasters that are occurring, daily in this country and throughout the world. And it's, I think, important. I'm so glad we had you as a guest speaker, because it's so important to understand that there are preventative measures that we can be taking to stop these man-made disasters, being, violence, warfare, terrorism attacks, things like that. That's man-made disasters that we as future healthcare providers will probably respond to in a medical capacity. But there are roles for us on the forefront to be part of this interdisciplinary approach to mitigate those events. So just the instruments there, that's great to know as a tool for us going forward, and to understand the role that we can play to bring in our colleagues if we're concerned, in practice with specific patients. Because, at the end of the day, we'll always be doing the reactive work. It's probably, we're going to break through cases, but as much prevention that we can do, it will hopefully translate to a lot of life saved. So thank you.
And you know what, as you're saying, I'm actually wishing I had focused on the waiver 21, the workplace assessment of violence risk. And I would encourage everybody to look at that. Even if you just get on the website, it's very salient to your work and, to healthcare settings, and the potential for any kind of insider risk, insider threat, and insiders broadly defined, right? Like everybody who has access to the facility. And as Dr. Bill pointed out, it's much harder if it's not a cleared setting, and you don't have guards and gates and guns. Anybody can come in, and college campuses have the same problem. I mean, some of the schools have people who are on the terrorist watch list, or other like violent offenders who, maybe they served their time, maybe they were never caught, but there's often no mechanism to screen out or to know that you might have a potentially dangerous person there. So you do want to be able to recognize the behavioral signs. And even if it's a matter of like taking one of those checklists to your leadership or to security, trying to get someone to respond and saying, hey, I'm not trying to do a formal threat assessment here, but I see a lot of signs, a lot of reason for concern, and the organization is responsible for looking into this. And you have a duty of care, to everyone in this setting, the professionals, not least of all, that, you guys, your jobs are already, hazardous and risky and stressful enough. That you can't have any kind of negligence or any kind of tolerance or aggressive or threatening behavior.
I think my 30-40 years, I've been pretty blessed with the law enforcement community and with the military community. As a physician, I've been able to connect with the intel people, with behavioral health people, clergy, etc. In the civilian world, I think you young people need to take this, what you learned today, and take it to your HICS, Hospital Incident Command System. Again, everybody's drilling for, here's a mass casualty and we'll do our triage. But imagine doing a tabletop at your hospital to meet requirements, but to focus on behavioral health. Because I trained in New York City. So back in the 80s, doctors were getting shot because of something, a patient was angry about something that happened to their family. So in Brooklyn, people would walk into the department head and shoot them. And so there are many, many case studies that we can all appreciate, and thank Dr. Balenger for sharing them. I think I love that graph, the curve.
Yes.
It just points out executive function, right? And gives you a truth. So understand your neurocognitive domains and partner up with your behavioral health subject matter experts. You can take this back to any type of hostage negotiation training or crisis negotiation training. You'll have a negotiator, but behind the negotiator is the NOC, the Negotiation Operational Center. And there you have trained professionals watching you, like Vicky, right? And while you're engaged in crisis, they're helping you, they're guiding you. But we have an opportunity to make things better. As Ilana said, focus on your hospital incident command system. Ilana will, as a trauma surgeon, she'll work with behavioral health people, pre and post op. Other people, I don't know all the backgrounds of Paige and Mitch and Jake and Allie, but Andrew will definitely deal with this in EMS. As an EMS director or fellow, we don't pay enough attention to psychiatric emergency medical systems. This is prevention. We spent a lot of time talking about traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress syndrome and generalized anxiety disorder, but we don't pay enough attention to the psyche or the spirit or the mind of these these fragile people, violent people. So,
yeah.
Anyone else? Any other comments from Jake or Mitch or Allie?
No, I'll just say that I feel like, first of all, thank you, Dr. Balenger, for speaking with us. This definitely allows all of us to kind of open up our minds to this whole new thought process, especially those of us who are still in school and going to be, like Dr. Bogragis was saying, be dealing with this on our day-to-day. So very, very informative talk, and really just thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. And I just want to make one final pitch for clinician safety, and this is easy for me to say, but don't hesitate to set limits. And if you are being asked to work in unacceptable conditions, from any standpoint, and I know that you're disaster medicine people, and you expect to take certain risks or be in certain environments or work with certain populations where you factor that in, and you anticipate in your training, and you have things to account for that. But if you're being asked to work on or with someone who is really out of control, and you don't feel like you can safely do your job and see to your own safety and security or the safety of people around you, don't hesitate to say, this is unacceptable and this is not the appropriate setting. Just like I don't take floridly psychotic people or apparent sociopaths as a solo practitioner in outpatient practice, right? I if someone has those issues, I say you need to go to a clinic or a hospital that has interdisciplinary team that has security. I don't say that to them, but that's what, you know, you need some semblance of security, you need a crisis response system. So think about whether the patient or the assignment is appropriate to the situation and the resources, you know, you have at your disposal. Obviously your training, your capabilities, but also just, you know, sometimes it's not safe and advisable to provide services to a certain person or in a certain context. And, you know, hopefully the leadership is watching out for you that way, but they might not know, they might not care. So and I'd be happy to come back and do something on clinician safety, you know, with kind of like just handy tips, like don't leave the scissors in a, you know, thing on your desk where just anybody could grab them. So, but, you know, there's more to it. And I'm sure Dr. Bill could also, I mean, that could actually be a good, you know, joint presentation because you have the operational background, but just please protect yourselves, take care of yourselves.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vicki.
Yes.
Before anyone else hops off, I do want to just plug the pediatric disaster medicines group is hosting a talk this coming Tuesday. We'll push it out. We'll push it out for anyone interested. If you're not on our listserv, I just put the Google Doc sign up there so you can join and hear about all future events, or you can catch us on the WADEM.org website. So thank you everybody for coming. It was really great to hear from you, Vicki.
Thanks
I'm
for
sure
having
we'll
me.
again in the future. I hope
Okay,
everyone
you all
has a
take
good rest of
care.
their weekend.
Bye-bye.
Take care.